want to talk about my assignment at Davidson College in this section. I remember that when I was out in the field, the mail came in, a helicopter usually, and I had probably some letters from Emily, and then there was one from the Department of Army. And the letter from DA, I opened it, looked at it, and it said, "We're assigning you to the Los Angeles High School Military Department in the junior ROTC. Well, that upset me. I didn't want that assignment. So I sat right down and wrote a letter, handwritten, put it in an envelope. We didn't have to stamp it or anything. And it said that I did not want that assignment, and I appreciate if they reconsider. 3 weeks or a month, they got another letter back. Said, you need to be able to follow orders or something to that effect, pretty strong. And however, we will change your orders to Davidson College, North Carolina. One other thing, I'd had an opportunity to get some R&R, some rest and recuperation, about midway through the tour. And I went to Hong Kong, and I enjoyed that very much for about 4 or 5 days. They flew us up. We were given a driver and a vehicle. The USO did, and he took us anywhere we wanted to go. And I remember all of us were interested in getting tailoring done. And I got Emily some dresses. I got myself some suits, uniform pieces, filled 2 suitcases. And then I had them mail both suitcases back to Columbus to Em so she could look at those as soon as they got there. I'd had 2 phone calls to Emily while I was in Vietnam. Very difficult to get. One I had done on R&R from Hong Kong, and that was a good conversation. But the second, I had gotten a helicopter ride into Saigon about noon, I guess, on a Saturday. And I went to the Saigon radio station, and they had a room there. Went into nothing but a table in there, and very quiet, small room, a microphone on the table, and you put on earphones. And then they would instruct you, and I think they did the same thing to Emily on the other end. But you would state a sentence, and then you would say, over. And I would say, hi, Em, great to talk to you, over. And then she'd come back, hi, Bob, how are you, over. What it was a radio connection where somebody was listening on the line, and they would switch the radio back and forth, my turn to talk, her turn to talk. So finally we learned that we needed to talk in longer sentences and so forth. But you can imagine the impersonality of, I love you, over. Just not a good setup at all. But I did do that while I was there. At the same time I was in Saigon for that phone call, I also went to the Rex Hotel where the officers in Saigon lived. And up on top was a restaurant and an open-air bar. The bar was covered, but the rest of the area where people sat was not a covered area. It rained on it there. And as I went into the area, there was a guy sitting over at the bar, and he saw me coming in. And he looked at me, and he said, you SOB, you such and such, but he had a smile on his face. And I couldn't quite figure out what in the world this was all about. And he came over, and he was laughing, and he said, you don't know what I'm talking about. And I said, no. He said, do you remember when I brought you resupply with rice and water and so forth, and you gave me a letter and some Viet Cong items? And then it all of a sudden came to me. I said, oh, no, you were in the helicopter when it got shot at so badly. And I learned that his crew chief had been shot in the legs. All of the helicopters both made it out. They could take a lot of fire. But anyway, he had laughed and come over to me. And I recognized him when I saw him, but I didn't recognize him in helicopter because he had his visor down. Of course, you couldn't see him. Although he sounded very friendly. I caught my plane back to the States, came back to Travis, Southern California, caught a commercial plane, and then went into Atlanta. Emily had come up to Atlanta to meet me, and I remember she had almost had an accident coming up there. She was by herself. And that night, getting home, we went to the hotel in Atlanta. There's a big open atrium with the restaurant up on top. It was quite the thing in those days, and everybody was raving about it. So I thought that would be a neat place to go on the first night back. So we went there and enjoyed it very much. We went back to Columbus, where I was going to spend some time and then go to see my mom before I had to report for duty. But very shortly after I got there, the police came to Granny's house, and they brought a note for me, and it was from Colonel Outlaw. He didn't have my phone number, but he had my address. Colonel Outlaw was a professor of military science at Davidson College, and he had wanted me to get in touch with him as soon as possible. Well, I was sort of distressed about that because I was looking forward to about a month, almost a month of vacation all the way up to Christmas before I'd report in for the next assignment. But I contacted him and he wanted me to come right away. And I went there, gave me an orientation on what the college was doing, what the ROTC department was doing, and then started talking to me about housing, where I would live. He wanted me to live right on the campus in one of the older houses, 2-story wooden usually. And I didn't think Emily would like that very much. I thought she would like a single floor and something a little more modern. Carlisle was not very pleased with that, I could tell, but I thought I'd better get the house that we're going to live in that she would like. So I found one. It belonged to Duke Power Company, and I believe that the rent was $75 or $85 a month, something like that. Good rent, so I was happy with it. We moved to Davidson just after Christmas, and I was getting myself oriented toward my new job. And one day they were having a parade on the parade field, and I went out. I wasn't a part of this thing, but I was sort of watching what was being done. And then I saw Mrs. Outlaw, Colonel Outlaw's wife, come into the stadium, and Emily was with her. I said, I wonder what that's about. I wonder why she's going to watch this parade. Anyway, I heard a couple of cadets talking, and they said, who's that good-looking girl with Mrs. Outlaw? And then I heard the other one whisper, said, that's the captain's wife. And so, sure enough, what happened was I got an award, and I was called to the front, and Mrs. Outlaw had told Emily this was going to happen. But that was kind of a surprise in a couple of ways to see Emily there, and also to get the award. Since I came into the ROTC department at mid-year, I picked up extra classes in each level, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, and I would teach those classes. Shortly after we got there, we learned that Emily was pregnant, and so we got a doctor who was over in Concord, North Carolina. That's who had been recommended to us by the local doctor. Emily would go back and forth to that doctor during the pregnancy to have checkups. One day at about 9 or 10 in the morning, Emily called me at the office, and she said she was having pains regularly and that she thought it might be time for her to go, but not to come yet. She would call me back. Not long after that, she called me, and the Cabarrus Hospital and doctor's office was about 15-20 miles away. So I was pretty anxious, and I rushed home, got her in the car. She didn't seem to be as rushed and as anxious as I was about this thing. We got her over to the doctor's office. He checked her out and said, yes, we'll admit you. So she was put in the hospital probably around noon of that day, and things ran about the same all day. And about 9, the doctor said, well, I think you can go home for the night. Well, I got a motel across the street from the hospital about 9, and a little before 11:40, the doctor called and said, you can come back. And so I went back, and at 11:40 that evening on the 12th of August, Vanessa was born. And so I stayed there a little while with Emily. She was really tired, dead tired. And so I didn't stay long. I looked at the baby, had a chance to hold the baby, and then she went to sleep, and I went back to the motel, and I came back the next morning. A day or so later, we went home and took the baby. Mrs. Heiss came up to, well, I think this was a little later because Emily had a problem and right after the birth, and I was very upset about this. I didn't understand what was happening. Had to take her back to get some treatments. I guess it was more common. I thought it was very special and very unusual, and it was upsetting to me. But anyway, the doctor treated her. She came home. Mrs. Heiss came to spend some time with her and the new baby. When the summer came at the end of the year, remember I went in about January, during the summertime, we had an ROTC summer camp at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was assigned to go to that. Colonel Outlaw was going to be the commander of the camp, and I was going to be one of the instructors. I got the job of teaching small arms, and I had a group of really talented NCOs. One was really a great marksman, and we would show and demonstrate each one of the weapons, and he would do a terrific job of firing. The class got a good reputation. People seemed to enjoy coming to it. The students liked it, and I had a number of visitors and a number of good compliments on it, so I appreciated that opportunity. I came back to Davidson. I became the adjutant, or the guy that sits outside the commandant's office, and I also taught the senior class of cadets. During the second summer I was there, I was head of the detachment back at Davidson. Some of the guys went on to Fort Bragg again, and I stayed there for that summer and got ready for the next year. At about that time, the Vietnam War was becoming pretty controversial, and it was a lot of issues around the campus and discussions, and debates and so forth. So the military was often invited, but Colonel Outlaw did not want us to get involved in the debate portion. We would only give the facts. And so several times I went to the debate, and then I went up front with a large map at first. In fact, there's a picture in a newspaper of me giving this briefing, and I would explain what was going on in Vietnam at the time, what in history had led us up to that point, and then I would sit down, and then the professors would begin to talk about the value of us being there, and it became more and more heated. I remember that at one point, one of our officers had left Davidson, Don Campbell, and he had gone to Vietnam. His wife got a call one night from a guy who said, "Are you the wife," I think her name was Sylvia Campbell, as I remember, "are you the wife of Don Campbell, who just got assignment to Vietnam?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And the voice said, "I hope he gets killed." And he hung up. So that tells you the way people got so emotional about this situation. The military was trying to do what it was told to do, and I appreciated those soldiers who went and served their country during that time. While at Davidson, I became good friends with another captain, and his name was Hal Fraley. He'd been in Laos even before I had been in Vietnam, and I went rather early to Vietnam. And so he came back, and he and I had some discussions about his activities in Laos and mine in Vietnam. I sent a letter to the Department of Army. I knew I was going to Germany. I knew that was the next on my assignment. It was too soon to go back to Vietnam after that shorter time. But I was to have another assignment and then return to Vietnam. And I asked to go to Germany and to be assigned to the Airborne Brigade and to be the S3 of the Airborne Brigade, the 509th, which part of the 8th Infantry Division. And a few weeks later, I guess, I got a letter back, and it said that we're assigning you to Germany, and you'll be assigned as S3 of the Airborne Battalion in Mainz, Germany. So I was very surprised at that. That was wonderful. I was going to go to the exact assignment that I had asked for. I just hoped that it held up before I got there. Very luckily, it did, and I'll talk about that element in the next section.